Friends, good evening and welcome. On behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago, we are honored to welcome today Reverend Wagner Sherer as today's guest speaker at the Home of Harmony. She'll be speaking on the topic, Episcopal Aerobics, How Anglicans Pray. As a way of introduction, Reverend Wagner Sherer is the pastor of St. John's Episcopal Church, which is only a few blocks from the Home of Harmony. She has been with St. John's for nearly 2 decades, where, along with her ministerial duties, Reverend Kara has been instrumental in building a vibrant faith community by conducting many community-oriented programs and activities. She has also encouraged engagement in social justice and anti-racism work. Earlier this year, Reverend Kara was elected the Bishop of Rochester, New York. We are immensely pleased with her expanded role and very happy to have her with us today to share insights on one of the key aspects of the Episcopal tradition. There will be time for question and answer at the end of the talk, so have your questions ready. And on that note, please join me in welcoming Reverend Kara on stage.
Thank you. Good to see you. So I'm going to talk about what she just said, Episcopal Aerobics, but the subtitle is Embodied Worship. In other words, one of the important things, I would argue, in Christian worship, but in specifically to the Episcopal Anglican tradition, is the use of all the senses and the whole body. And I thought it would be helpful, since this is a place that studies many paths and many ways to connect with the holy, that you might actually interject as I'm talking. So I'm going to talk about different symbols and embodiments, and I have some familiarity with other religions, but not much. So I will invite you to think of examples from other religions that you might know. So I'm going to start with the very basic thing that Christians use as the initiation rites, which is baptism, which is water. And just look there. You see water there, right? So water is a symbol in many faiths and has lots of meaning. In the Christian faith, water is considered to be that which comes from God, a creation of God. It embodies life because it's necessary for life. And all the different ways in which water is shown in the world have symbolism in our faith. So water as cleansing, water as necessary for life, water as power, we can use it to make power, water that erodes, water that can be poisoned, or water that is clean. There are so many ways in which water is an essential part of our life. So in the Christian faith, baptism by immersion in water is a symbol of entrance into the community. I realize we have a guest, Swami. Thank you for being here. Water is also used in our Eucharist, which is the celebration of communion, where we use bread and wine. And in everything that I will talk about, and I think this is true in other faiths, everything has a practical significance and a spiritual significance. Often, the practical significance comes first. We need water to cleanse our bodies, and then it becomes a symbol of cleansing of the soul or cleansing of the mind. So we also use water in our worship because in the ancient Middle East, wine was, of course, a way that you were able to have something wet to drink, and by making it alcoholic, it killed the germs. And wine was very thick, and you often had to mix it with water. So you will see a priest with the wine still adding some water to the wine, even though our wine is no longer in need of dilution. Though it is often highly alcoholic to kill germs because we share a common cup. You will also see often the priest washing their hands before performing the rites. There's something that I say when that happens, which is a quote from the Jewish scriptures: "Let justice flow down like water, and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream." So it's a symbol of our call for justice in the world. Another time that we use water in our worship is one service out of the year, a Thursday before we celebrate Easter, in which we reenact the story of Jesus having the Last Supper with his friends and then getting up from the table and washing their feet. And he says to them, "What am I doing?" And they say, "No, don't wash our feet." He said, "If I, your teacher, your rabbi, your guru, washes your feet, so must you do for others." So that's symbolic. So we wash each other's feet on that night. I have been to temples in Japan, and where you walk in and there is water to wash your face and your hands. When you go often to a Muslim place of worship, you wash your feet and you remove your shoes. So many places we remove our shoes in order to worship. So water has that primal importance in many religions. Does anyone want to share another way in which water is significant in a tradition that you know about, or one that I've forgotten about? Does anything come to mind? Oh, of course, I was just in India, and where Gandhi, after his body was burned, his ashes went into the 7 holy rivers, right? So there's another example of water as an important element in religious life. So that is, in the Christian tradition, we baptize both babies and adults and children, probably babies more, but I think that's changing. But that is the entrance rite, the beginning of the entrance into the community. The second thing that happens when a baby is baptized is that they are given oil. The sign of a cross in oil, and it's simple olive oil, but with a very expensive perfume, the essence of balsa wood. It's very expensive, and this chrismation, this putting of oil, the practical meaning is that in a dry culture, if you take a bath, you need to put on moisturizer, right, to preserve the moisture in your body. So that's the practical meaning. In the theological, the spiritual meaning is that baptism is a reminder that we are children of God and that nothing can take that away. And so we are sealed with the oil to show that the holiness is there and can't be washed away. It's sealed in. So the baby is, it's called chrismation, given the oil at baptism. We use oil, so this is part of the senses, right? Water to drink, water to bathe. Oil we use when someone is sick. People can come forward and have oil put on their heads and hands placed on their heads and prayers said in hopes of their healing. I want to make a little note about Christian healing. It is not about cure. It's not about a cure or magical cure. Do I believe miracles happen? Yes. But often when we're praying for healing, it is for the rebalancing and integration of body, mind, and soul. And so what we're praying for, and we know from Eastern medicine and Western medicine and all medicine, that the body is connected, right? So you can't just heal one part of the body. It is also the spirit, the soul that have to be integrated in that healing. And that oil is a symbol of healing. And we use oil in healing, right? We also use it in perfumes. It's also a symbol of wealth. Oil is expensive in many different, water is expensive in many cultures, right? All these things are precious, and the other symbol of the oil is one of royalty, especially with the perfume mixed in. So it is also used at the ordination of a priest, and the oil is put on the hands to help remind the priest that the hands are for healing. If anybody watched the enthronement of King Charles of England, they put oil on his hands as well. It is a symbol of kings and queens and prophets. In the Jewish tradition, the prophets were anointed with oil as a symbol of their office. And finally, we use the oil when someone is dying. It's similar to the healing rites, but it's a last reminder of their preciousness in God's eyes and a sealing before death. Can anyone think of other ways in which oil is significant? Yeah. Oh. Yes, so I can repeat the question. Okay. So yes, when you think about oil, it's cooking. It's many of the same things we talked about water. It's cooking, it's eating, it is fuel. You can make light with it. And so it is, again, like an essential part of who we are as humans, I think. And I would say in our world, we know that we've fought a lot of wars over oil in one form, and we will probably fight wars over water in the way the world is, right? So yes, oil is a symbol of many things, and power. It's energy, right, and light. I'm trying to think of other ways in which I've seen oil used. I can't think of other religious examples, but that's.
Oil in the Hindu religion is often used for lighting the lamp.
Yeah.
It's used as a fuel for lighting the lamp.
Excellent. So thank you. In the Hindu tradition, oil for the lamps, and they're often they burn.
The lamps they made is not the deity.
Always, yeah.
Oil is used there.
Oh, and of course I'm forgetting, and in the Christian tradition, when we, after we bless the bread and wine, we put it in a place with an oil lamp that is on perpetually to symbolize that the bread and wine is there. And I was just thinking of the Jewish Hanukkah is about oil lasting longer than, a miracle of oil lasting longer than it was supposed to. So thank you for that, and please keep adding to this, learning this. So then that first Christian rite of initiation is water and oil. And then the second very important Christian we call sacrament is the bread and wine, the communion that is blessed. And the symbol of the bread and wine is that these are things created by God and human hands. So we don't share wheat and grapes. It is the combination of God's gift in the wheat and the grapes and the sweat of human hands, the effort of humans to make the wine and the bread that we offer. And it's a symbol to us of the way the world is supposed to work. So in Christian theology, if we believe that God created the world, it's a gift to us, we are to use it for the betterment of others, ourselves and others, not to be exploited. So the bread and the wine is a symbol of when we work with God, then good things happen and people are fed. So we, at St. John's, we buy the wine, but we do make the bread. And we say certain prayers over it, and there's 4 basic elements of communion. Every communion is only when we offer, so it has to be offered given, blessed. The bread has to be broken. And that is a symbol of the brokenness of the world. It's also a symbol of Jesus Christ and his death, but it's a symbol of humanity's brokenness. And then it must be shared. And the symbol of the bread is that everyone gets a piece. And in our tradition, babies, toddlers, children, adults, everybody receives communion. We welcome everyone to receive communion, but we understand that we often have people of other faiths in our pews, and they don't need to come if they don't want to, right? Because it's not important if you're Jewish or Hindu or whatever to receive the communion, but you're welcome to if you want to. So that symbol, that has a lot of symbolism around that meal. And one other symbolism of that meal is that we don't throw the extras away. The wine is either saved to be brought to people who are sick, who couldn't come, or it is consumed, or it can be returned to the earth. So sometimes you'll see on a Sunday breadcrumbs coming out of the window because it needs to be returned to the earth. It's not meant to go in the sewer. And that is a symbol that of this abundance that we have received from God, nothing is wasted. Everybody is fed, nothing is wasted. When I was in India in February, we went to a Sikh temple in which, first of all, we took off our shoes and socks and covered our heads, and we went and sat. We saw where they served, this particular Sikh temple served 30,000 people a day and 80,000 on Sunday, sitting at a meal. And the importance of that, we were told, is part of the, do not ascribe to the caste system. So when you eat, you sit with anyone. That is similar to our communion idea. And then we also saw where the scriptures were being chanted. And then we went outside and we were given a little ball of honey, wheat, and, well, just honey and wheat, I think. And it was very much to me like communion because they put it in your hand and you eat it. So that's my most recent example of bread in a different context. Of course, in the Jewish tradition, it's Passover right now, and they use bread that's unleavened for symbolic reasons. Can anyone think of any other bread and wine in other faiths? They give you what? Prasad? And what is that?
Something close to that what you're seeing offer others.
Okay. Well, and of course in consecrated
food.
fruit. Okay. Well, and of course when we see in Buddhism, you often see altars with offerings of food in front of them, right? Thank you. Yes. Thank you. All right. I wanted to give you those basic things, and now I'm really going to get to aerobics, but those were we're doing kind of both symbolism and aerobics. So in Christian worship, one of the basic parts, which I know you are aware of because I participated in a procession when this building was opened. We walked and came in. In Christian worship, also processions are important. There are certain outfits that we wear. There are certain things that we carry. One of my favorite ones, which has fallen, not many Christian churches still do this, but it is on certain days of the year, usually the spring and the fall. They're called rogation days. there is a tradition of beating the bounds, which is when the priest and the congregation will go to the edges of the parish, kind of the area of the church, outside of the church, but the village, and mark and bless, like the fence posts, the areas that are mark the area of the church. And this is a way, again, it's a way to say thank you for the seasons, but also to kind of bless the harvest and to bless the workers who work in the fields. And that's a fun procession to watch. Ones you might be more familiar with is the week before Easter. There's something called Palm Sunday, which is reenacting when Jesus entered into Jerusalem, and we wave palms. Many beautiful different cultures do it in very different ways. You will see also, particularly in Roman Catholic countries, on Good Friday, they might actually do a procession with a cross with some person on it, really reenacting that. But anytime we've done processions just around the block or into our garden and back in, and you will see sometimes people carrying crosses. You'll see people carrying candles, which is again the oil and the lighting. It's like lighting the way. And you will see incense, and I know incense is something shared by many, many religious traditions. In the Christian church, what I was told, you all know how young a religion Christianity is compared to Hinduism and Buddhism. And I think it's interesting the ways in which religious people, in order to separate themselves from other religions, kind of go away from things, and then they're kind of rediscovered. So in the Christian church, I think in order to separate themselves from Rome, I think for a long time they didn't use incense, but then it comes back in with different meanings. So what I was told is that in the Middle Ages, people smelled a lot because they didn't take a lot of baths. And so incense was important to just clear the air in a cathedral. And then it has a spiritual meaning of prayers going up to heaven, or the smell of incense awakening our senses and our awareness of God. Maybe somebody could share the meaning of incense in Hinduism or other faith?
In Hinduism, it is said there are 5 basic tattva or elements. One of them is the air, the water, the fire, and earth, so on, right? So there, incense sticks sometimes symbolizes the air element. Because the incense which disappears, the smoke disappears there, it's symbolic of one of the elements. Is offered as one item to the god or goddess along with the incense.
So I'm going to say that again for the recording, and you can test me. So one of the important things is the elements in Hinduism, so earth, air, water. Did you say water? Yes. And fire, and that incense is an offering that goes into the air for a god or goddess.
So it stands as a representative of the air element.
Air element. It symbolizes the air element. Thank you. Any other? The other thing I wanted to mention with processions, you would also see in some cultures, Christian cultures, where they will carry statues around of Mary or of Jesus. At Christmas, possibly the infant Jesus. And of course, in Chicago, we know the Virgin of Guadalupe. There's a big procession. And I think in Hinduism, do you carry statues around or just? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ratha Yatra is a big festival there. Where the deity is carried on the chariot, and there's a big procession to see it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think as people, religious people, we're always learning from each other and imitating and adapting, right, for our own understanding. So processing is an important thing. Episcopalians particularly like to sing a lot, and one thing you'll notice is that we sing and walk at the same time. So we're kind of proud of being able to do that, because often you have to balance books and walk and not trip. The second, aerobic, so processing. There's my example. Standing. So I'm going to invite you to stand if you're able, because I think standing we learn things different, or we embody things differently, right? So the very earliest Christian form of prayer was to stand like this. What does that do? It opens your heart, yeah? Sometimes looking up, right? So you feel, so we stand to praise God, to sing, because you can sing better when you're not squishing your lungs, right? And to pray. So it's a posture of awareness. I think this is true in many faiths, that standing is perhaps, I guess we pay attention in a different way when we stand. Any other examples of kind of official standing?
In Russian Orthodoxy, they never sit down. The whole service is done standing.
That's right, yes. And they don't have pews. People can wander around in Russian Orthodox, yeah, and Greek Orthodox too. You stand. You may be seated if you wish. Yeah, Mark. Oh, yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, in government and in speech making or whatever. Yes, thank you. The last prayers are standing up in Hinduism, thank you. In some ways, I joke with my congregation that, so we do a lot of stand, sit, kneel throughout. Stand, sit, kneel, stand, sit, kneel. But particularly when we do the prayer over the bread and wine, we all stand if we're able. Parts of it we also can kneel. But the priest holds her hands like this in the prayer over the bread and wine. And it's kind of a long prayer. And I sometimes joke that I'm paid to hold my hands like this. But in reality, everyone could stand like that because it is our prayer together. So then there's sitting, which you're doing. And in our tradition, we sit to listen, as you are doing so nicely and attentively. We sit to listen. And we also sit to meditate. There is, compared to Hinduism, a very young, but it goes back to ancient 2,000-year-old tradition of meditation in Christian worship. Together in the worship space, there's meditation time. Americans are not very good at it because we have that American thing about how things have to happen fast, and I think in the advent of television and phones, but the more we can take time to sit in silence together, which is different than sitting in silence alone. I'm going to say that again because I think it's significant. I think human beings do need to sit in silence alone, but there's also something powerful about sitting in silence in community, in a community. And our meditation can include singing, speaking, chanting, as we know from many religious traditions. Chanting, which is really just an extended speech, right? I could sing this and tell you that about chanting because all I'm doing is elongating the words, right? So that's ancient. We hear it in so many things, right? The call to worship in Muslim. I heard a lot of chanting in India with instrumentation, chanting without instrumentation. I think scientists are doing a lot of research into the effects of singing, the effects of chanting. Was one thing that I think really struck us during the pandemic when we were worshiping on Zoom, each in our own rooms, and because of the way Zoom works, everybody had to be muted or it just was a complete cacophony, right? But I did notice that people were singing at home on their own, and it was much more engaged than if you just watch. And then finally, kneeling. So in the Christian tradition, and this is left from a Christian tradition, you would kneel like this, right? And so the railing was made, this was made to receive communion, so you could kneel and receive the bread and wine. But we also have kneelers. We would have kneelers, I don't know, Savani, when you were there, they come down. And so, and we used to kneel for prayers. We don't do it as much as we used to. It's something that's kind of gone. I don't know if it's because of people's knees or, but we do kneel. The other thing you will notice is genuflecting. That's just a fancy word for this. For the camera. So that's a kneeling on one knee, and it's often done when people enter the space as a recognition of the space. Often people bow, which I think is another form of kneeling. It's just the head only. So in the Christian tradition, that bowing, like Mark was saying about standing when someone important came in early Christian worship, there were no priests. There would be somebody that would preside over the service, and that person would change, and so they would have a seat, and you would come in and bow to recognize the presider, whoever was going to run the service. I think similar, I think Muslims do not have a professional paid clergy. Imams, they all have other jobs. That's a recent development in Christianity, like a paid professional religious person. So the bowing could signify recognizing whoever's leading the service. It also is, Episcopalians in particular, bow when a cross comes by, because it's the symbol of Jesus' death and resurrection. You will notice sometimes you will notice in a Christian worship that whenever the name of Jesus Christ is said, there's a bow. So there's little forms of recognition that symbolize honor. Which I think, when I was in India, we all honored each other this way all the time. And it's done much less, I think, in Christian tradition or in Western tradition, but there are elements that remain in there. So there's kneeling for prayer, bowing for reverence. The third thing that people, so what did I say? So we bow. Yeah, genuflection. So those are to the presider or to the cross. The third thing that people bow to is in the church where I mentioned where the bread and wine is kept in reserve for those who are sick, and there's an oil lamp there. That is a bow for the recognition of the holy present in that place. I think Christians say two different things about holiness. So we recognize, God is in this place, but we also recognize God is everywhere. And so our focus is kind of both, but that's a reminder to me that God is present in that bread and wine, but also in the whole world. And of course, as we understand, present in each other when we bow to each other. One other part of kneel and bow is prostration, which I will show. So that's not done every Sunday, but that is done in a couple of occasions. It's done on Good Friday when we remember Jesus' crucifixion, and the priests and the other people doing the service come in and lie prostrate as a very solemn moment. Before I was ordained and prayers were chanted over me, I lay prostrate. So it's again a very ancient form of humility, but we don't do it. Mark is a member. We don't do it at 8 o'clock every Sunday. So there are vestiges of these things still in the service. Did anyone want to say anything about other religious traditions with kneeling and bowing? That is my next thing here. Yes, I just thought of one thing, though, which is I have gone to the Muslim Community Center on Elston, and when they pray, they're doing, right? Those are for certain words that they say, so that's an example of kneeling in worship, and those are based on whatever's being chanted. When I was in India at certain shrines, I feel like I remember in the Sikh temple for sure, but I remember in the Hindu temple, people would kneel, right? So yes, another symbol that Christians use is to cross themselves. It, of course, comes from the form of the cross, the symbol of Jesus' death and resurrection, and is done often when his name is mentioned. But it is a habit when people come into church. There's often a bowl of water by the entrance, which is either from the baptism or a little smaller amount of water. People dip their fingers in the water to remember their baptism and cross themselves as a form of honor. And there are various places in the service in which we cross ourselves, and one of them is in reference to Jesus' death and resurrection in the creed. Some of those practices are less used. There's also another symbol when we read the words of Jesus or the stories about Jesus. There's a special book, so some of the scriptures is read from a podium like this, but the words of Jesus are read from the center, often with candles and a procession. And the book is opened, and when I say the gospel according to Matthew, I'll put the sign of the cross on the book, on my forehead, on my lips, and on my heart, and other people will do the same. It is meant to mean that these words should be in our minds and on our lips and in our hearts. So those are some other gestures of worship. Yeah. Yes, so on Ash Wednesday, we do receive ashes on the forehead as a reminder of our mortality. And those palms I was telling you about that we wave, we save because they're blessed. And the next year we burn them and put them on our foreheads. It was rather ironic this year. I was actually in India when Lent began on Ash Wednesday, And almost everywhere I went in India, I would get a blessing, a little orange, right, powdered or red dot. And it was so joyful and welcoming. And I did try to find ashes, but the Christian churches didn't have good websites, and I couldn't figure out. There were some, there's a tiny amount of Christians in India, but we did go to Christian churches for a worship service and to sing. We were singing concerts, but so it was kind of interesting for me to reflect on this very solemn, sad day. And it's not sad, like it is important for us to remember our mortality, but it was such a contrast to the joyful things that I was receiving as I walked and met people in various places. So one thing I haven't mentioned is dancing. We do think that Christians did a little more dancing until they got too serious. When I was in college, actually, I was part of a dance group, and we danced in Christian churches. And it was based, our leader had done research on ancient Christian worship, dancing. And so we did things more in processions, like 5 steps forward and 2 steps back as a way to enter. And that was that seems to have been part. And of course, if you think of the Sufis dancing, there's ecstatic dancing in many cultures and many religions. I think mostly in Christian worship, when you see dancing, it's usually to music that's very joyful, and it's spontaneous, not usually scripted. I think we should dance more in worship because it expresses kind of a full range of human experience and certainly is very embodied. So, I've given you symbols of water and oil, bread and wine, light, and then movements like processing, maybe some dancing, standing, sitting, kneeling, bowing, and crossing oneself. There are those 2 basic symbols of Christianity, baptism and the Eucharist, the communion. There are other rituals that go around, of course, marriage, which was not a Christian thing, right? It was, there wasn't really marriage in Christian churches until 1,000 years after Jesus, so 1,000 years ago. But you'll see when I do marriages, you'll see one thing that we do, the priest wears a stole as a symbol. It's meant to look like a yoke, like what holds oxen together. It's meant to be a yoke to the community, to God. And when the couple holds hands, you wrap the stole around their clasped hands. This is where the phrase tying the knot came from. That's a symbol of Christian, of unity. And blessing over rings. Those are all mostly practices adapted from local culture, right? Not necessarily Christian theology. We have rituals around, because we do infant baptism, when people are older, about if they want to choose to be part of the Christian faith that their parents brought them up in. We have something called confirmation. That's going to be one of my jobs as a bishop. Priests don't do that. The bishops are the symbol of the connection of the community. So bishops come in and lay hands on people who are being confirmed in their faith, which is basically an adult recognition of this is the path that my parents chose for me, and I want to continue on this path. And of course, we have funeral rites in which many of the same practices at a funeral. We would use water to symbolize the baptism. We would often do communion, and for a long time, Christians were buried, but also cremated is much more common. We don't have as many rules about when a funeral happens, like when you bury someone, you do it quickly, but when you do a memorial service, when someone's been cremated, we do usually bring both either the body in the coffin or the ashes into the church, and they sit there as we have communion together as a symbol of their continued presence in the community. So those are, an ordination, of course, is another one which I mentioned, which is to make deacons and priests and bishops.